episode, the pilot episode of the Deaf and Nerdy podcast. I am Jose, and this is my guest, Pwnz here, my co-host.
Well, the full name is Pwnzworth, and it's just the gamer tag I use for everything, and it's what everyone calls me because it's easier than getting me confused with our other friend Albert. But my real name's Albert. You guys all call me Pwnzworth.
Well, I kind of want to shift towards what this podcast is going to be about. It's essentially where I cover everything nerd and pop culture, but through the lens of disability. Me in particular, I am deaf, so the site focuses a bit more heavily on the deaf aspect about it. And so I would do things like write a deaf review on how accessible is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, what type of accessibility features you can get at a comic book convention such as C2E2, an event I went to last year.
I remember that one.
Yeah, and that particular trip, I ended up going there with some sign language interpreters, and I went through the process, and that what it's like to go to a convention with sign language interpreters following me around all day. But with this particular podcast, what we're going to be hoping to do is take a topic on choice and introduce it to Pwnz to get his initial thoughts, and then if he has any questions, I'll answer them to kind of guide him and hopefully the listeners on stuff they didn't know about the deaf community, deaf culture, and how it interacts with the nerd and geek culture. I guess to start off, I would say I am deaf, completely deaf in my right ear, and I have high frequency loss in my left ear. What that means is that a lot of high-pitched sounds I have trouble hearing, but overall I do hear, but the challenge with that comes from a lot of words sound the same to me, and when there's a lot of background noise, all the sounds I hear get meshed together. So like if, let's say, we're playing PUBG, Fortnite, or Apex Legends, I have to turn off the sound from the game so that way I can hear everyone else clearly. That way I can understand what's being said at any given time. So why don't we just move on to like Pwnz? Do you have any specific question you have about the deaf culture, deaf community? Like
Well, in general, I don't know anything about it, which is why I kind of agreed to the podcast because it never was a topic on my mind, and then you told us you were deaf like maybe 2 years ago. Was that around the time you told us that you were having hearing problems?
Yeah, like I think I ended up telling like our group of friends that I was deaf, but like I was born deaf. But for a lot of our interactions, people tend to not notice that I'm deaf because I can somewhat pass as hearing. I don't intentionally do it, but even though I was born deaf, I grew up mainstream, so I wasn't really taught sign language as a kid. And it wasn't until when I told you guys 2 years ago that I actually started getting hearing aids for the first time. And I think once I realized that my hearing was getting vastly worse, I decided to kind of start doing things about it. I went ahead and went through the process to get my hearing aids. And I've even gone to school to start learning sign language, and I've been doing that for the past 2 years to kind of build my skills because as it stands now, I am expecting to have my hearing get worse. Even though my hearing is I can manage more or less. If it's a quiet environment, I should be fine. But as we get older, our hearing naturally gets worse, and I want to be prepared for the day if or when my hearing goes out completely. So I want to, that's what motivated me to make the site and essentially make this podcast because I'm a big fan of video games. I grew up on the NES. I'm my biggest fan of the Spider-Man comics and even Why the Last Man comics. I'm a big fan of those. And I found that with video games and nerd and pop culture, uh, it isn't always accessible, but in some avenues, people have really pushed for the accessibility, and I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, that's it's like completely new ground for me too, because like you said, I had known, I've known you for a long time, and all the times we were in person, I didn't notice at all that you were like
Deaf?
that had issues. Like I didn't notice you favoring your left or anything like that.
Yeah,
And
I guess when it comes to conversations, I basically do different things. Like how Pwnz mentioned, I make sure that whenever people are talking to me, that my good, quote unquote, good ear is facing to the people who are talking. But I also do things like I read their lips. I take the context of what our conversation is about to make educated guesses on if there's a word I didn't fully recognize. I take the context of our conversation to get an idea of what exactly we're talking about. That, and I kind of just BS my way through a conversation where like you don't have to fully understand what's being said to get a general idea of what the conversation is about, and you can kind of BS your way through it.
I mean, see, that's the thing. Like, I had no idea, and when you're telling me now, it sounds like a lot of work, and I didn't realize you had all that stuff to deal with.
Yeah, it is a bit of work, but I think for me, it's kind of become second nature because remember, like I was born deaf, so these things that I've done, like I've had speech therapy since elementary school, and so I was trained to do these techniques, and I've invested basically my entire life doing these things, and so I can do it as second nature. So like if I were to teach you these things now, Pons, it would seem kind of challenging, but if I were to give you like 20 plus years, I'm pretty sure you would have it down to the point where it's second nature for you.
No, that makes sense. Because yeah, since I don't know anything, you telling me about it does sound like a lot. But I guess yeah, if it was something I constantly had to deal with, I probably would have to. You kind of have to get used to. I
Yeah,
am interested in the podcast you're doing because I feel it's good to be more informed, and it helps out because when you told us, it was new information to us, even though you had been dealing with this for a kid.
mm.
And then as soon as you told us, it became like this, like a topic of griefing in the group too.
Yeah, it kind of does, I think. But I think with our group of friends, we're generally assholes, so I that's
Yeah,
kind of
that's true. No,
yeah,
everyone, honestly, in the group, everyone does get picked on for everything.
yeah.
So,
That's how we show our affection in our group of friends. I think
but that's
would
why I
you?
think it's good that you let us know exactly how this affects you, and
Yeah. Yeah, because I think what you were ended up asking me before was like before we were recording, you ended up asking me, is there a specific category for people who are deaf? And the way I told you is that within the deaf community, you have people who are deaf with an uppercase D. These are people who are have hearing loss, but are fluent in sign language and are very active in the deaf community. And they are big supporters of deaf actors, deaf musicians, and anything else that involves deaf pride. And then
oh
you,
yeah, because it
uh,
was like the exact question was like, what levels of deafness there are, or what types? Oh, classes. I remember I asked what classes of deafness are there. I thought it was like either you're deaf or you're not.
that's the common misconception. A lot of people think that when someone says that they're deaf, is that they have no hearing whatsoever.
Hmm.
But deafness is in a spectrum. There are those who can hear high frequency, high pitched sounds, but they can't hear lower pitched sounds. And then you have people on the other end who they can't hear high frequency sounds or high pitched sounds, but they can hear things with a low bass, deep sounds, and deep voices. Uh, when it comes to my deafness in particular, I always try to compare it visually to imagine like you're looking through a window. You can see it fine and clearly, but let's say you put a curtain over that window. Depending on what type of curtain you put on that window, you can still make out what's on the other side, but the finer details you can't make it out. Like if you were to put a very thick curtain on your window, you can see that, oh, there's a building on the other side of this window. But if I were to ask you how many windows are on that building, what type of windows, what are the designs, you would have a hard time describing those to me because you're like, I can't tell, they're very blurry. Deafness works in that same way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
see, like that was all like I don't know, just yeah. That's why when you told us, even when you told me, I had a hard time believing you. I remember the first time you told me, I was like bullshit. This is like okay, how are you talking to me and listening to me if you're deaf?
Yeah, no,
And
no, yeah, and like for those who are curious, who are probably thinking the same thing, well, how the hell is this asshole talking to Pwns and doing a podcast? Like, isn't like how does that even work? Well, like, what I do like is that we're talking over the internet over our PCs, and what I do on my end is that I increase the volume that I get from Pwns, and I also make sure that I wear my hearing aids. and the hearing aids have been adjusted to kind of give me the extra oomph that I need to properly hear a little bit better. But I also go through the effort of making sure there's no background noise around me. So the only sounds I ever hear is Pwnz's voice. So this is how we can do this particular podcast.
Do you also have to do stuff like, do you set your headphones to like mono or something to like?
Yeah, actually I do. I set my, like, if a game in particular has a mono feature, I always turn it on because like this actually works great because an issue that I often deal with, particularly with games like PUBG, Fortnite, or even Battlefield, first-person shooters and the like, the biggest challenge I have is you've probably been there. We've done a couple of games where you you guys hear where a particular sound is coming from, like gunfire, and you guys immediately know where it's at. I can't
Mm-hmm.
tell where a sound is coming from. It's like in real life and in video games. So like even if I set it to auto, so to mono, I can't tell where that sound is coming from. So what I have to do in video games is that I have to have my character stand still and I rotate the camera and I focus on, let's say, the gunfire that I hear. If I when I have the camera rotate and when I can tell what direction the sound is the loudest, that's where I know the sound is coming from.
You have to use the volume of it then, because I use
Yes,
directional. Like if I hear it on my right side, I turn around
yeah,
immediately.
but I can't notice that. Like I don't know where a sound is coming from. So what I'm forced to do is that I'm forced to have, like, the same way we do in real life. If I want to know where a sound is coming from, I have to stand still and I rotate like every few degrees to get an idea. Okay, where is this sound coming from? To kind of see where is the sound the loudest. Oh, like it's soft, 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 louder, 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 loud, soft, 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 and then I go back. Oh, it's loudest here, so the sound is logically coming from this direction. But
Mm,
for games like PUBG, Fortnite, or Battlefield, if you try to do that, you're an easy target.
I was gonna say it probably puts you in a disadvantage.
Yeah, it really does, man. It's kind of a pain in the ass. It's why I kind of shift towards games like League of Legends and Heroes of the Storm because you have visual cues.
Oh,
There is sound that I'm sure with stereo sounds great, but the sound isn't dedicated to one particular direction. We have a mini map where not only can I see an icon where my teammates are at, but if we have a visual on enemy players, they show up on that same mini map. You also have
mm.
pings where it says, I'm going here, I need help here, danger here, defend this particular lane or defend this camp. Those are great ways to communicate, which I think even in our group of friends we don't really use. I think I'm the only one who uses them.
Well, I think part of it's because we're so, um, since we're always in the group chat, we're all used to like yelling at each other to do stuff. So we're really bad at using pings. It's not that we don't need them either, because I noticed that when we do use them, we tend to do a little bit better.
Hmm.
Because I don't know, maybe it's because it forces us to pay more attention. Because if we're just yelling, a lot of times what happens is we misunderstand what the other person said, and then we end up either going the wrong way or like, especially because sometimes someone will yell, they're right here, but I don't know where that person is at that moment until like
Yeah, it's like
pay
I don't
attention.
know where you're at. I'm not keeping track of your life and your role responsibilities. I'm focusing on if you're playing the tank, you're focusing on basically winning your lane if you're by yourself or protecting the healer, which
No, I can see how a game like that has those systems in place might make it easier. One quick question though before that. So you're deaf on the right side, right?
yeah, no hearing whatsoever.
And you're partial. You have high frequency hearing loss on the left.
Yeah.
And you use a hearing aid. Do you know sign language yet, or are you still
Yeah,
in?
yeah. Like I've actually taken sign language classes 2 years ago. I started with ASL 1, then I've taken ASL 2, then I've taken linguistics of American Sign Language, and I also go to what are called deaf coffee chats. In my particular area, they're hosted every Friday of the month at a particular Starbucks. Each Friday, it's at a different Starbucks location, and it changes from city to city, and I tend to do that 3 to 4 times a month. Most likely just 2 to 3, but three being the most often one because the trips are very short and I don't have to go very far.
Okay.
Yeah, but
So
the
in
biggest
your
kind of
case,
go on.
um, in your case, you told me earlier that deafness is like a spectrum.
Yeah.
So where does that put you? Like, is there a category for that specific type?
In terms
Because
of
you also
rankings of who has it worse, or
know, like when if you have to like fill out forms or something, is it like a specific type of deafness? Because you told me there's also deafness with a lowercase d and deafness with a capital case D.
yeah, that's actually perfect because when someone is called deaf with a lowercase d, that's someone who has a hearing loss the same way as someone who's called uppercase d, deaf. But the difference is that a person who is deaf, lowercase d, they don't know sign language more often than not, and they're not active in the deaf community. That is the definition within the deaf community with the deaf culture, is that you have someone who is active in the deaf community. They support deaf actors, and is very active in the deaf community, like going to deaf coffee chats, and basically like these are the people that know each other very well. Like for example, I when I was first getting introduced to the deaf community 2 years ago, because I've for most of my life I never met a deaf person up until 2 years ago when I got assistance through the Department of Rehabilitating Services. And my counselor, she was deaf. She was the first deaf person I interacted with, and she recommended me to go to deaf coffee chats. And through doing research online through Facebook and other social media avenues, I basically had like a temporary deaf mentor who was in a different part of the states, uh, and then I actually met her in person. And a lot of people who are in deaf community that even at the college I go to, they know her because like a lot of deaf people really know each other because it's this close, tight knit circle. Go
How
on.
many when you go to like the well, I kind of have two questions. Like one was well-known deaf people, and the other one's like how big are these groups usually go to?
It depends where you're at. If you go to like LA, downtown Chicago, that sort of stuff, you are gonna find a big group of people. But if you go to more rural areas, places where you don't have a lot of people to begin with, you're like it's gonna be tough to find other deaf people there. I mean, like the biggest problem that we've had for like the past few decades is that right before the internet, it was very hard for different groups of people to get together. Like I said, for me, like I was deaf, but I hadn't met another deaf person because it's so hard for people to who are deaf to kind of find each other. But it's why when they do, they keep in contact with each other. Like even the people who go to deaf conferences, they go there on a regular basis. And if I have like say a month where I get super busy with other personal matters and I can't attend. And they notice and they text me and they hit me up saying, "Hey, are you fine? Are you okay? I didn't see you stop by to the Deaf Coffee Chat. I just wanted to double check and see if everything's fine." Because oftentimes when you go to a Deaf Coffee Chat, we essentially more or less size each other up. Where normally if someone else would think of it that they're being very intrusive, they would ask like, "Are you hearing? Or are you deaf?" If you're hearing, you'll be asked a set of questions like, "Where did you learn American Sign Language? Who was your professor? When did you learn?" But if you're deaf, your ass is I get asked like, "Oh, like were you born deaf or did you become deaf?" I will tell them I was born deaf. Does your family know sign language? And like, if you are someone who's like comes from multiple backgrounds, like not just born in the U.S., but you have like my family that were born and raised in Mexico, they might ask, are they fluent in Spanish sign language and that sort of stuff. And if they do or don't, like particularly if they don't know sign language, they go, why? Why didn't they? Yeah, so they start really asking personal questions. And
Well, I
to
was like when I didn't know there was a Spanish sign language. I thought it was like the same thing.
No, like every country has their own form of sign language in the same way that every country has its own spoken language. So you have like
Huh.
here, like the sign language I'm learning here is the American Sign Language. You have Spanish Sign Language, French Sign Language, British Sign Language, Australian Sign Language, and they're all very different.
Wait, so you mean tell me American Sign Language is not the same as British Sign Language?
Yeah, the particularly the biggest differences is uh, British Sign Language. Their alphabet uses both hands. But American Sign Language uses one hand, like for A, B, C, and D. We use one hand. So let's say someone is eating, or they're basically holding a phone and they're having a video conversation with someone. They might end up finger spelling a particular word if they because they can't properly sign it with both their hands. So that's kind of a benefit from that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It seems like I always thought that as long as you knew sign language, you knew sign language with everybody.
Well, big thing people don't realize is that we can actually say a lot through our facial expressions and our body language. Like you can cover your ears, and if someone has a very pissed off looking face and you know that they're talking loud, you know they're probably very pissed off at you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. Actually, is that scenario, I guess, something more common with people who are lowercase d? Because you said uppercase d, they're more involved in the community, they know sign language, they meet people, they talk about it. So are lowercase d deaf people who just kind of like tend to keep to themselves and they just go about their day dealing with being deaf?
In a way, because if I had to describe myself, I think before 2 years ago, I was OKSD, where I was deaf. I've dealt with the same issues that someone who's out in the deaf community dealt with having to deal with accessibility. Like for me, the biggest challenge I had growing up in school was that people knew I was deaf, so I
Mm.
was under that mentality that I don't ask for help. I try to figure it out on my own because that's just what we do. Uh, and like in the school system, like where teachers and the administrators at the school knew I was deaf. At that point, when they finally came across me, they were like, okay, what do you do? Well, I read the class materials ahead of time, and I make sure I put in that extra effort so that way I don't fall behind. But the problem with that was they went and said, oh, he's doing everything right, he has good grades, we have no reason to help him. I was like, no, like what they failed to realize is that that was so much more work, especially for a kid, and it caused me to kind of get burnt out so much and so frequently.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, but I guess that it was that like hard work ethic that really motivated me. That I think for me it kind of keeps me from being lazy.
But so no one ever diagnosed you before, right? Because
No, I was diagnosed. They knew I was deaf since elementary school. Like as far as the specifics, we doctors never found out why I was deaf. Like I've had I think multiple exams, and the inner workings of the ear seem fine. But for some reason, it's just not working in my right ear in particular. And with the left one, they couldn't figure it out. Like they just said, well, it's more or less fine, but he has high frequency hearing loss. So like over the years, that hearing has gotten worse. But yeah, doctors never found out what was the cause of it.
or even the what's it called when you told me about the anime convention you went to?
Yeah.
I thought that was funny too because you told me. Did you ever actually get the what was it, the assistant to follow you around?
Yeah, dude. I had when I went to the convention that Pwnz is talking about is called C2E2. Um, it was held last year in 2018, and basically what I had to do is that I went to the convention and I contacted their accessibility rep over there, which a lot of people don't know they actually have. And I told them, hey, I'm interested in having a sign language interpreter, and they were like, if you ever need a sign language interpreter, like you need to ask us in advance so we can schedule sign language interpreters to come in. For that particular convention, what I had to do is that I had to provide a detailed schedule of the panels I was interested in going to, so that way they can book people in for those particular panels. Now, initially, when I did this, I was under the impression that, oh, they're going to bring an interpreter at each of the panels. But what they did instead is that when I showed up to the convention, I told them, hey, I'm here. I asked for a sign language interpreter. So it's like, oh yeah, like they're gonna meet up with you at the first panel you scheduled to have an interpreter, and they're just gonna follow you from that point on. And when I came in, I had two interpreters, and like
Yeah, I
for
remember when you told me. I remember I said, "I can't believe you're gonna waste some poor assistant's time when he can be actually helping out with someone who's actually fully, or who wants someone who's actually deaf." And but the thing is, over time, as you told me more and more about how it worked and how it affected you, I was like, well, I could see how it's an issue and how like little basic things can be like
Yeah.
uh
Did it make
made
you start to
harder.
feel like you're more of an asshole for saying those things? Like, oh shit, I was being an asshole.
I don't know. I feel like I'm still just as like uh asshole-ish when we're in a group.
But you were questioning me with logic and that sort of stuff. Like,
Yeah, I took into account more what you were going through as you told me more because I was like, okay, so for him, it's something he's got to deal with on a daily basis, and it can make things that are supposed to be just plain fun, you know.
a huge pain in
Um,
the ass.
yeah, like well, I was gonna say chore, but yes, a huge pain in the ass.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's kind of like why I kind of made this podcast to give you a chance and you listeners a chance to know what it's like to be deaf, but also to navigate through the geek and nerd community. Because when you go to convention, because we've gone to other conventions such as Anime Expo, whatchamacallit, Kamikaze, Stan Lee's convention, Anime Central, but like when we've gone, at least when I've gone with you guys, I didn't have those services with me because I honestly didn't know they had services like that.
Okay, so I'm looking through the link you just sent. So this is a article on your blog, right?
Yeah, on the site, definitely that I wrote about. It was basically that covered my whole Comic Con C2E2 experience,
Mm,
where I wrote about that C2E2 that had accessibility services, and they had something called the Medical Assistance Program. I
yeah,
go
I see.
into detail what that is, what type of services they provide, like such as handicap parking, elevators for easier mobility, which is something that people don't really think about. There's also a cold storage for people who need medications and need to take them regularly, but they don't want to carry out like a fridge with them so that way the medications are properly stored away. You have
Mm.
priority seating for panels and screenings. You have allowed entry for people who use guide or service animals. So, like, if I were to have a hearing dog come with me to the convention, they wouldn't be allowed to turn me away. They would actually like have a protocol on what to do when you are dealing with a service animal.
Oh, yeah, I have seen videos of service animal drama.
Yeah.
I
Uh,
actually I hate to be cynical and assume that like a company would just do something out of their goodness of their heart. But is this like a government thing, or is this like they actually did themselves decide to provide accessibility?
Well, here in the U.S., we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, where it says like it's illegal for a place of business to discriminate against a particular group of people. With this, it's people with disabilities, so people who have cerebral palsy, people who are deaf, people who are blind. They can't turn these people away because of their disability. It's in our American laws, so it's illegal to discriminate based on that. So, like, if I were to go to a convention or any other event and they turned me away because I was deaf, that's grounds for sue, and they would be breaking the law for doing so.
Oh, it was passed in 1990.
Is that what you're doing research on the Americans with Disability Act?
I
No.
literally googled it. I have no idea, but it says 1990.
Yeah, I'm looking at it too for more specific details. But yeah, it's basically a law that's designed to kind of help make things um, much more accessible for people who have disabilities. Make sure that they have like extra backup to their rights that
Oh,
such
is that when
as
they say like adding ramps and stuff?
yeah, well, like curb cuts, stuff like that. It's like because we added that to our infrastructure a bit more. But also things such as like, let's say you have someone who's deaf who gets pulled over. They come in, bring them in for questioning. They have the right to a sign language interpreter, and by law, they are required to provide that person with a sign language interpreter, so that way there's two-way communication.
That
Yeah,
because of that, they're required to provide assistance when you go to convention.
it's funny that you mentioned about that people aren't doing these things out of the goodness of their hearts, because recently the FCC had something called the CVAA. It is called the 21st Century Communications Video and Accessibility Act. This is the very reason that we have accessibility features on our smartphones, which requires companies that have some type of communication service to be to be accessible to people with different disabilities. So it's why you have captions on phones and so on and so forth. Um, Now, up until recently, it was just regarded to phones, but because video games in particular, such as Xbox, PlayStation, Steam, and so on, they like the consoles themselves have text and voice chat. They fall underneath this category. Even video games that have in-game voice communication. But the interesting about that is, for the past 8 years, they were exempt because the video game industry like went to the FCC and there was, hey, we're kind of still new at this. Communication isn't a big thing, but now that the times have changed, communication such as games as Fortnite, Apex, League of Legends, any multiplayer-based game, especially team-based game, requires good communication. So you have built-in voice chat. People use Discord. People use Xbox Live Chat and PlayStation's chat system as well. The FCC went and said, okay, we've given you guys a lot of breaks with this. As of the start of 2019, every company is required to have these communication features. It's why games like Apex Legends has things such as speech to text, and you have games like Fortnite have audio cues for players who are interested in the game. So that like developers are adding those in not because they want to, but sometimes they have to. They're required by law because if they don't, they could be hit with fines with the FCC.
But it's so that's really recent then, right? Like,
Yeah, it started since January of this year of 2019.
wow. So literally like 2 3 months ago.
Yeah, but then you do have some companies that are actually very good. Naughty Dog in particular, I've become a big fan of them because they've had this accessibility initiative where they try to make sure that the game is accessible as possible. One particular person who was a fan of the games, his name was Josh Schraub. For those who don't know, he's basically editor in chief of a website called Dagger, which they review games based on how accessible they are to different disabilities. And he went to him and said that he couldn't finish playing Uncharted 2, I believe, because the end had a quick time buddy match mechanic, and he wasn't unable to do buddy mashing, so he couldn't finish playing the game that he spent $60 on, which was bullshit. After he spent his hard-earned money, so the people in Naughty Dog started implementing features such as like if you hold a button that it would act as pressing the button multiple times. Yeah.
Wait, so his this he wasn't able to hit that. So assuming his was more physical, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I can see why he'd be upset, especially you know. And I'm pretty sure he liked the game. So there. I mean, I guess that makes sense because I did used to hear about companies doing stuff for
Yeah.
really like controllers and stuff. I
Yeah,
remember I
because
saw one.
yeah, because you also have organizations like an organization that I work with, which is called the Able Gamers Charity. What they do is, particularly, they have something called the Players Panel, which is I'm a part of. What they do is that they take companies like video game developers, and they take people with different disabilities, and they become the go-to person where they have these two people meet. That way, especially with the laws becoming more updated to be more disability friendly, they go to people with disabilities to provide them feedback. And that's something that I do. I provide um, feedback on how accessible a game is in terms of for a deaf person, specifically me with the particular hearing loss that I have. So they are very active in making sure that if you're going to have a deaf person do it, get feedback, you have multiple deaf people give feedback, so that because deafness is very different. If someone has no hearing whatsoever, it's going to be a different experience than for me who can hear some sounds.
Wait, so do they change programming stuff like the design wise, or
But what some game developers will do is that they will make some changes if they're able to. If they're smart, they'll implement those designs from the very beginning. That way, it becomes a central part of the game itself, and to reduce the chances of having buggy issues and so forth. But when you have issues such as like captions, like making sure that the subtitles are easily read, that it doesn't blend into the various background environments of, let's say, an open world game where you can go from very sandy areas that looks like Tatooine to an icy area full of white snow, where if you have white subtitles, it can be so hard to see in a very like snowy background such as that.
I mean, I guess like it sounds like hard stuff to take into account, but I guess especially if you're like a bigger company and your game reaches a lot more people, it makes sense that you should take those things into account.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because the charity they work with people like in Humble Bundle, Harmonix, Rockstar. They've hosted, been in at PAX. They've also worked with EA and Paradox Interactive, just to name a few.
Oh yeah, okay. I'm scrolling down. I see them down there. Yeah.
And one thing that they do is that if you're someone who has a disability, you can kind of contact them saying like, hey, I have this particular condition. Can you point me to somewhere where I can find maybe an assistive device so that way I can actually play video games or other services that I may be qualified for, and they'll help the person with that. Like for me, one thing I ended up getting my hands on through a particular gig was I got this thing called the Tobii Eye Tracker, where in gaming it's pretty cool because like it can use for assisted aim. So if you have dexterity limitations, you can aim your eyes at a particular target, then push down the iron sights button, and your character will automatically aim at what you're looking at. It's a great way to make it accessible.
Oh, actually, that sounds pretty cool. Because it seems more useful for someone who has like difficulty with the controller. You and me like don't have those issues, but even then, sometimes the eye is quicker than your thumbs to like get the reticle over the other enemy.
Yeah, I'll give you some images so that we can get a look at it. It's a gift to see how it works. But for me, the one thing that in particular that I actually really like is that it has potential for a deaf person like me.
Oh, I've seen this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what you could do with it is like you can use it to work with the HUD.
Oh, you mean so like your ammo count and your health will like start to fade away if you don't look at it?
Yeah, here I sent you a GIF.
Oh, okay. That's pretty cool. What game is that one right there?
Uh,
It's not Metro, is it?
it looks like the Square Enix game. I'm blanking on the name.
Oh,
It's
is that spin-off one?
Deus Ex Mankind Divided.
Oh, okay, okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. I know you can use it for
Cyber.
the Ghost Recon Wildlands, being one in particular.
That's a cool design. Even not, even for regular gaming, that's pretty cool. It's a really cool feature.
Yeah, like I'm sending you one of Ghost Recon Wildlands where it's used with the radio menu.
And this helps out people with disabilities.
It has the potential to really help them out. Like if you don't have a disability, like that works really great. But if you
You could
have,
literally use your eyes as a controller. And
yeah, it like put less strain on the person who wants to play a video game, and it makes it easier to play a video.
I mean, I've seen clips of people using this, but I haven't really looked too hard into it. Do you know how accurate it is right now?
I've used it. It's pretty accurate, man.
Yeah. Nice.
Well, we've kind of gone on for about an hour, so I guess we're gonna call it a day with that.
We didn't even touch on the games with accessibility. I guess we could save that till later. Save the games with accessibility coverage.
Yeah. So everything that we talked about, I'll put links in the description right below. That way, if you guys are interested in the Able Games charity, the Tobii Eye Tracker, or anything else that we talked about today, you guys can have those resources available to you, so you guys can kind of take the time and look for it. But I think that's gonna be it for today. Next time, we're going to be going over the accessibility in Apex Legends, which just came out by the people behind Titanfall 2. And then you have Fortnite, and we're going to be looking at PUBG, and we're going to be comparing the accessibility features between all three games. So we look forward to meeting you guys again next time.
Yep, same here.
All right. See ya.